not just at law schools and legal aid organizations, but it's also being used in the for-profit space. I worked with Verizon, which is the 14th biggest company in the country a few years ago, to create a legal hackathon because they wanted to shorten the time it took from contract execution to contract enforceability, or from the moment that they wanted to ink a contract to the moment it became enforceable. Because if they can shorten it from 14 days to 13 days, they make $1 billion more a year. Guess what? They asked a bunch of people to work on it for a day. They shortened it instead of to 13 days to 11 days. They realized millions of dollars as a result because people were empowered to work creatively. This is something that you're seeing more and more, and they're fun, and I encourage people to get engaged. Productizing, right? So traditionally, law was done in a one-off manner. You come in, I help you with your matter. You leave, I help the next person. But the question becomes, what happens if you can create a system that takes a little longer to create the first time, but allows you to help effectively an infinite number of people anytime they want it? A good example of this is TurboTax. Has anyone used TurboTax? If you haven't used TurboTax is a system where at the end of the year, rather than going to see a CPA and paying $1,000, you pay $59 to TurboTax. You log in and you have all your papers ready to go, all your tax papers you've collected over the year, and you're asked a series of questions. Did you get married this year? And it even has a bubble. Well, we don't care if you're married, but there's a different tax treatment if you are, which is why we want to know. Did you have a child? Same thing. We don't care if you have a kid, but it does make a difference for tax. Here's why we want to know. You answer all these questions, you fill in a couple of facts, and what happens at the end of the form is you get spit out a tax return that's ready to be submitted. In fact, you can electronically file it right there. It's $59, guys. You used to, 15 years ago, have to go to a CPA to get that. It cost $1,000, and you wasted a half a day, and you had to do the same thing year after year after year after year. So productizing, the idea of taking something that we've traditionally done one-off and saying, look, this is high enough volume, it's predictable enough that we can code it, is really valuable. It's happening in the law firm space. Goodwin Procter in 2009. Goodwin is a big Boston law firm. It's sort of one of the old line Boston law firms. In 2009, like a lot of corporate law firms, they weren't doing much business because the economy was crashing. And they had all these people there that they needed something to do with effectively. They weren't going to meet their billable hour requirements, but they wanted them to do something interesting. So they said, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we create incorporation papers for people? And the same way that TurboTax does taxes for people, why don't we do the incorporation for them? And all they have to do is they can log onto our site. We'll ask them a series of questions to help them figure out whether they're best as a Delaware LLC or a Delaware LLP or an incorporation or other areas of corporate law I don't fully understand. And we'll guide them through that process. And at the end, we'll give them the papers. We'll give them a sheet of instructions and say, look, here's how you file this thing in Delaware. And by the way, if you ever need legal advice, let us know. It was a totally free product with Goodwin just playing the long game that some percentage of those companies that they gave free legal advice would ultimately become huge. And they'd need an IPO. And of course, what do you need for IPOs? A lot of lawyers. And who are they going to call? Well, I mean, you guys know the social norm. I give you something. At some point, you're supposed to give me something. They call Goodwin Procter. So I had a talk with their managing partner at a dinner a while ago. I said, out of curiosity, Goodwin Procter profitable? He said, oh yeah. And I said, well, is it something where it was like profitable immediately? He said, yeah, it was profitable immediately. Because what we started to do was we started to do things like create a contact list. So you could have these free forms, and all we asked for in return was your contact information. So we could send you the email in our quarterly newsletter. And of course, being top of mind as a law firm, that quarterly newsletter led to millions and millions and millions of dollars of business. And now, 7 years later, some of those companies have IPO'd, and they've, of course, hired Goodwin Procter to do it. This space is totally open. So when you see a process where you say, this is highly repeatable, it's highly predictable how the results are going to look, even if it's complex, like TurboTax, this is the space where productization makes a ton of space. So let me give you one more trend. Collaboration. So several years ago, Coke was taking a ton of heat because the plastic bottles they used were destroying the earth. And they go into the landfill, and they stay in the landfill for 10,000 years. And why do we have to have these stupid plastic bottles that are just filling our landfills and making the earth sicker? Heinz started to get the same sort of complaint around the same time. these ketchup bottles that people go through every 4th of July. They're filling the earth. Why do we have them? Can't we have some more effective way to do it that's recyclable, that makes sense, etc.? So Heinz and Coke called one another. In fact, I don't know who called who, to be honest. And they said, why don't we collaborate on this, right? Just because we're both making plastic consumer products doesn't mean that your good is our bad, right? Let's think meaningfully about working together in this space. And they came up with this thing called Plant Bottle. And Plant Bottle is a more efficient plastic bottle. In fact, let's see. See, you know, remember how plastic bottles felt 5 years ago? Right, these are plant bottles, right? They're now the industry standard. Actually, Coke and Heinz have turned it into a profit center to build these things. But they did it together. These two companies that potentially were not aligned in any meaningful way, two separate companies, rather than going at it alone, they did it together. So you're starting to see more and more of this in the legal space. On the legal aid side, there are all kinds of organizations that are forming around sharing intelligence among legal aid organizations. What software are you using? What web developer are you using? Who are you hiring to give you outside advice? What's been your experience with this grant-making organization? Right? And there are listserv upon listservs that are free for people in the field to get into. And on the corporate side, you're seeing the same sort of thing through organizations like CLOC. CLOC is the Corporate Legal Operations Consortium. These are people that work in law departments at big corporations, not in law firms, in corporations. And they're sharing information with each other. What's been your experience with this piece of software? What's been your experience with this firm? What's been your experience with this judge? So that they can think meaningfully about pooling all that information they have. I even have started to see people say in there, how much is firm X charging you to do this kind of work? Because of course there's no rule against corporations talking to each other about how much they're paying their lawyer anymore. There's a problem with me talking to you about how much you pay your barber, right? This is something that is information that's shareable, and people are starting to share it. So what that means for you guys is thinking meaningfully about your career and how you can find other entities and organizations beyond the local bar that allow you to share information that's valuable, that you can take back to your clients, that you can provide better service, and that you can make more money from. Now, let's talk for just a minute about how to get out of this space, right, or how to get into this space. The first one is staying educated, or if you feel like you don't know anything, getting educated. So at Suffolk, we just created an online legal tech certificate. It's at legaltechcertificate.com. It's not designed for current JD students, so this isn't a sales pitch for any of you. Look, there's give or take 115,000 law students at any given time in the US. There's a meaningful opportunity to learn these skills in class at 3 or 4 law schools. So the question is, what happens when people who haven't had these opportunities graduate? They're in practice for 30 or 40 years, and they just don't have an effective way to learn how to create a Python script or to learn Lean and Six Sigma other than an occasional CLE. We created this online legal tech certificate program to give people that opportunity that mirrors largely what we do. But I don't want to represent that that's the only way. In fact, you know, I learned this stuff all on my own, doing online courses, watching YouTube, taking Coursera, doing edX. This stuff is free, right? So if you go on Twitter and you use the hashtag tag legal tech or legal inno for legal innovation, you will see so many projects that give you positive, say, like, wait a minute, that's pretty neat. I'm going to go work in an OUI firm. This would be valuable to take there. What do I need to understand that? And invariably, there'll be someone say, oh, you just need to understand a little bit of Python scripting. You just need to know how to create a regular expression. And the beauty of this low barrier to entry in this space is that all this stuff can be learned on your own. In fact, all of the people who are working in legal tech now, for them, well, not all, most, learned it on their own. They learned it by getting a book out of the library that was about Python. They got a book out of the library that was about automation. They got the free 30-day trial for HotDocs, which is a piece of automation software, and they read the manual and they learned HotDocs on their own. And then they launched a career out. So staying educated or getting educated is one of the real strategies that I think is important. I'm going to tell this vignette briefly because I want to use our time valuable and make sure we have time to talk. Southwest Airlines, when it came into existence, was boxed out by the FAA. The FAA wouldn't let them exist. So Herb Kelleher, incidentally, who's a lawyer, said, well, wait a minute, if I just fly in Texas, I'm not subject to FAA rules, right? And the FAA said, well, that's true, but you're going to have safety problems, which is why we had a problem with you becoming a national carrier. And what Kelleher did was he proved by flying between 3 cities in Texas that his airline, which wasn't regulated by the FAA, could fly with equal or better safety than national carriers. And it turns out that he was right, and Southwest Airlines had the best safety record of any airline in the country when it was flying just within Texas. And he went back to Congress and he said, look, you got to give us a pass. You need to make Southwest Airlines a national carrier. And they did. And today, Southwest is the most profitable airline in the country. So the corollary here to law is what you see with this person on the right. For years, the work of law has been a monopoly from people with JDs who are members of a bar of a given jurisdiction. Washington State recognized that they had a real problem with people who couldn't afford lawyers in civil cases, specifically in the family law situation. It had 80-90% of the people who were showing up to court with no lawyer whatsoever, and as a result, they were losing. And they were losing on big matters. They were getting evicted, they were losing child custody, they weren't getting alimony and divorces, serious stuff. Now, we would say, well, you don't have a right under the Constitution. This isn't a criminal matter. True. But if you want to talk about justice, people are losing kids. They're losing their houses. You need to find some way to even this up. So Washington State, in my corollary to Southwest Airlines, said, well, let's try something new. Rather than just having JDs who are members of bars practicing law, let's have someone else. Let's have limited license law technicians. This woman you see on the right is the world's first limited license law technician. She is able to practice law legally based on her education and her certificate. She did a course that was a year long as opposed to your 3 or 4 year course. She didn't take the bar exam. She took some sort of mini version that only applied to her area. Her debt load is a tiny fraction of what it would be if she got a JD. And she's able to, in turn, charge clients less in the limited area of law that she's able to practice. So one of the things I like to think a lot about is how can you do better legal services in a way that comports with the rules, or how can you argue for change to the rules that doesn't look like the traditional model? And it's happening all over the place. The triple LT model in Washington State is the first and biggest example. The fellows you see on the left are a 2-person firm in Texas. They do intellectual property law. None of the software that was available for them was working, so they built their own piece of software. The firm's called Kamara & Sibley. The top software tool they built is called CS Disco. It's a discovery tool for IP lawyers. That tool is now at 30% of the biggest 200 law firms in the country. They make many multiples a year in terms of profitability from CS Disco than they do from actually representing clients one-to-one. So the importance of creating something shouldn't be lost. What I've shown you on the right here is a wireframing tool. Here's a cool thing. If you feel like you don't understand technology, but you have an idea, there's all sorts of free wireframing technology out there where you can effectively draw a picture of how all the screens on your app will look. And actually, you can make them react. You can make them work. You can email them to someone and say, hey, look, when you press this button, it goes to this other screen. Now, it's a prototype. It's a puppet. It doesn't really fully work. But in the technology space, the goal is to create MVPs, minimum viable products. In other words, can I build a model to give someone a sense of how this thing will work? That's how CS Disco started out, and that's how I encourage people who feel like, I'm interested in this space, but I don't yet have the skills. That's what I encourage them to do. If you Google wireframing tools, and then you go on Twitter and use hashtag legal tech, what you'll find is you'll get 50 ideas of things that aren't built that could be based on what you see at your internships, externships, clerkships, and summer jobs. They exist, and someone just needs to build them. The space is wide open. $720 million has been spent in venture capital money in legal tech startups in the last 4 years. So the investment arc is going up quite quickly. And the sort of axiom is that if you can't raise $1 million, you're really doing something wrong. There are all sorts of entities that are willing to give $1 million to someone to try an idea that appears vetted, even if nothing's been built, right? And I've seen it happen time and time again. You see these products, you say, oh, it's not that good. They got $1 million. And they're going to spend the next couple of years building this product, working on it, and seeing if it becomes something good, because that's a strategy that venture capitalists have. They spread money around. The biggest way to get started there is with wireframe. Let me give you just one more, and then I'd like to talk. This fella that you see is named Casey Flaherty. Casey created a tool several years ago that we collaborated on called the Legal Tech Assessment. It helped make sure that people were proficient using Word and Excel and actually tested their ability to get through projects quickly at a pace that you'd expect of someone that was getting paid for it. Casey was counsel at Kia Motors, and he was sick of paying lawyers for 5 hours when he knew that 3 of those hours were spent futzing with, formatting on briefs, right? So he said, I'm not going to hire anyone else until they can pass this assessment. And Casey has gone on to become sort of an efficiency wonk, and he consults in that space now. And he wrote this book, which is available free online, called Unless You Ask. And that's a guide for people that work at companies that says when you hire a law firm, here are all the things that you should make sure that you ask them for. Not just good legal representation, but here are all the goodies they should be giving you at no added charge. And it's a really interesting book because it's essentially the secrets of how to get the most out of a law firm. Now, I don't know how many people here are interested in corporate work or interested in big law firm work. It really doesn't matter. What matters is that this kind of intelligence exists. And whatever sort of organization that you go to work in, the thing that you need to be thinking about is, how can I make sure that I'm capturing all the value for my clients and for my organization from legal people? And starting with a book like Unless You Ask is a good way to do it. So making sure that your organization is just prepared to be efficient is key. So, with that said, I'm going to end with this slide. This is a picnic spot in India called Krishna's Butterball. And the thing that always bothers me about it is this poor kid and the dog that are sitting right in the shadow of this boulder. That's not Photoshop, that's real. And, presumably, for years and years, people have gone and picnicked under that rock, right? And they've had fun, and they make sure a cool picture or good sight, whatever. But I always say, that rock is going to fall someday, right? And it's all well and good unless you're the kid or the dog or someone that cares about them when it falls, right? So when I think about legal technology and innovation, I think about it from two perspectives. One is this defensive perspective, right? Are you going to be underneath the rock when it falls, or are you going to be smart enough to not be? And then the other is in the opportunity perspective, right? The chance to do something better for your clients, the chance for you to do something better for your organization, the chance to do something better for society by saying, like, look, we can do this better. We just have to take a little bit of pause and look at the tools and look at the methods that are available to us. So, with that said, I humbly would love to hear your thoughts and feedback and ideas that you might have. So, thanks.
We definitely have time for a few questions. Anyone have any questions? Yeah.
I noticed you talking about a lot of big law firms. I've worked for a smaller law firm, and I'm wondering how many of these pieces of technology are applicable to smaller firms that might not have the resources to hire wonks or create all these systems. Because I was a law clerk for 3 years. I was also the billing assistant. I was also the guy who created and put together and maintained the website. I also cleaned up offices when attorneys left. So I'm wondering.
You're my kind of guy. That's awesome. Yeah.
How a smaller firm that might not have the resources could use some of this technology anyways.
I love it. So I'm going to give you a few examples, and the short answer is that's in some ways where it's a best fit, right? So let me give you a few examples. I had a student who learned how to do automation a few years ago, which is basically creating a guided interview. You ask a series of questions and it generates a letter back end. He had worked in personal injury firms on the plaintiff side throughout law school. And what he did was he learned that, used that automation technology and took it back to his law firm and hooked it up to their medical record and billing request person. They had a clerk whose whole job it was all day, every day for people that have been injured in car accidents or malpractice or whatever, to send 1,000 letters. We need records and bills from date X to date Y. They need to be in this form. They need to include A but not B. So he created an automated form. And what it did was it allowed you to say, here's the client's name, then it would fill in that client's date of birth and social security number and the date of the accident, or whatever the necessary and appropriate information was. And then it would say, go to this tab and click all the providers, and you downloaded a database of names and addresses of providers, and you would click, I need it from this 6 people, then you click the button that said assemble. And what spits out is 6 letters with 6 envelopes ready for a paralegal or an attorney to review and sign and send out. And it even, version 2, even sent a diary note to the calendar and said, 30 days follow up if nothing's come through. So there's an example of something that every small law firm that does that sort of work takes up a ton of time, but it's not important professional time, right? This isn't the kind of stuff we want lawyers thinking about. What we want lawyers thinking about is judgment-based decisions in consultation with clients and being creative, effectively. What we want machines thinking about is doing automatic stuff that doesn't need to be in your space. So I'll bore you with one corollary. It's like if you go to a new doctor's office, right? If the doctor herself takes your blood pressure, get out, right? You want a doctor's office where someone that does not have an MD takes your weight and height and all that. Doctor shouldn't be thinking about those things, right? The doctor should be thinking about, oh, you present with this condition. It could be disease A, it could be disease B, it could be nothing at all that'll clear up. Which is it based on my experience and judgment? So anytime you have one of those sorts of problems, it's a good space. I'll say one other thing. I had a student that completed the certificate program, and again, all the pieces of this certificate program can be completed self-study, and I'm glad, email me if you have questions, you want to learn something, anyone here, email me and say, I want to learn about X, where can I go? I'll give you the free stuff, right? We had a student that graduated from our program who said, I want to be a family law lawyer. She'd done our family law clinic, she just loved it. And she didn't want to, she had job offers, she didn't want to do that stuff. She wanted to go be a family law lawyer. So she went and she got a job at a firm in the Seaport with 8 lawyers, and she's sort of their technical point person, right? She negotiated something with her now boss that she would get to bill something 100 hours a year exploring this space, bringing back opportunities to the firm, and then figuring out if they made sense there. So in a traditional small firm setting or a solo setting, you look for opportunities and you leverage those opportunities. There's a firm in the western part of the state run by, I can't remember the name of the firm, Joel Feldman is the partner whose name comes to mind. And they represent low-income people, not pro bono, but low bono. So they're people that have like landlord-tenant problems. They come to them and they say, look, for X number of dollars, we'll represent you, and then we'll try to recover some more money because the judge is authorized under statute to compensate us further. And they use these models to make sure that everything happens as efficiently as possible so that they can give people the best rates. And again, they're not poverty lawyers, they're regular folks that they represent. They're just not the kind of folks who can spend $400 an hour per lawyer. I hope that answered your question.
It did, thank you very much.
Thanks.
It's really helpful when you give corollaries and specific examples, and I thought some of the most meaningful ones were when you talked about the ones that impact the like CPCS and then the public sector, where the resources are the most pressing and the most need. So I was wondering if you could speak to any specific examples, and hopefully some that maybe students have created of examples that the public sector and the, have used in this field.
I would love to. So let me give you 2 quick examples, right? Local ones, right?
Yeah.
One, Mass Law Reform Institute, MLRI, has a website that is for people who need to self-help with legal problems. So they have civil legal problems, they're not going to get a free lawyer, legal aid's overwhelmed, and they're going to get turned away, or they don't qualify, but they need information. So on that website, someone can go on and they can look at a chatbot that asks them a series of questions about whether they're eligible for personal bankruptcy, and if so, what form it should take. I'm not a bankruptcy lawyer, but I gather, there are different paths that only fit some people. So here's why that's valuable. You can do that if you have access to a computer, you're literate, and you're comfortable doing it. The alternative is to go make an appointment at MLRI, wait all day for a paralegal or a law clerk to see you, and then you get the same bit of information. So MLRI has a bankruptcy chatbot built on Q&A markup. Another easy one, built by a student. Another one is the tool that the Public Defender's Office uses, CPCS in Massachusetts. CPCS has a strange mission. They don't just represent criminal defendants. They, in Massachusetts, represent anyone where there is a justice interest at stake, right, Julie? So it would be something like a person who was mentally ill and there was a possibility they were going to be committed. They're not criminals, but they're going to lose a liberty interest if they have to go to a locked facility. So when you go to the CPCS website, there is a chatbot we built that asks a series of questions to figure out if people are a fit there. So it'll ask them something like, is your problem, and it's in plain language, of course, it has to be able to speak to the community. So it'll ask a question to determine if it's a civil or criminal problem, if they want to have an individual lawyer, because when you're at CPCS, you might get assigned someone, but you don't get to choose, and then other eligibility-related questions. And the idea is that they want to save the time from people who should be working on legal problems and output that time so it's people, or so it's computers handling those things. Let me give you one more that my team didn't build, but I find exciting. Connecticut, specifically the area around New Haven, has a ton of self-help litigants who show up in court in small claims matters and things like that. And the judges and magistrates were having a really hard time there because it was just clogging up the court system to have to explain basic rules of evidence, explain when people got to talk, and other things that you would expect someone who'd never been to court wouldn't understand. So the team at Northeastern Law, which has a terrific program, designed a game that anyone who's going to go self-represent in that courthouse has to represent that as long as they were capable of playing, they played it. And the game is a didactic one. It teaches you when to stand and when to speak and when to shut up and when to make a legal argument. And the judges have in turn, and there's data behind it, reported that it has had really, really successful results, built by students. Let me give you one more, because this one's exciting. Sorry. There are thousands. So in the state of Michigan, there's a problem with self-represented litigants and divorces. You had people who wanted to get divorced. They couldn't afford a lawyer. They tried to go through the system itself. They were muddling up the system. So they built an automated tool that asked a series of questions about assets and income and kids and all these things that are related to divorce that a divorce lawyer would ask. From there, it populated a form that they were to bring to court with them. And they did a test, right? And it was an appropriately scientific test. And what they determined was that people who had human lawyers who were assigned to them had no higher a success rate, which was defined as actually successfully getting the divorce within the appropriate period, no higher a success rate than people that had used this form, built by students, not my students, but built by students, right? So it makes a real difference in places where people don't get meaningful access to justice, as long as you have people that are willing to work on it.
I know we're almost out of time. I guess the only question I would like to so how much technology knowledge do you have to be able to, work in these areas? I mean, for those of us sitting here, a lot of people come to law school because, we heard there's no math, right? And so, or you just haven't, this isn't what you've emphasized in your education up until now. So how much of that learning curve or is necessary to be able to be successful working in some of these areas?
Sure. So thank you, Joy. So I should have emphasized that. So the answer is that you just have to have an interest in it. The tools that are available to you are accessible and self-learnable, even if you have no acumen in it. So if anyone's ever built a website on Squarespace or Wix, you say, I could build this beautiful website. It's because someone did all the hard work for you behind the scenes. And then there are skills that take absolutely no use of the computer, like process improvement and project management. You can take a class in Legal Lean Sigma, which is Lean Six Sigma applied specifically to law. There's no math, there's no computers, there's no nothing. It's just talking, right? And based on a one-weekend class, you can find work in this space. I mean, the jobs are there. The jobs are there. All right. And again, I know people have to go to class. You can email me if you have questions or there's something you want to learn. I'm at Gabe at lawtomatic.com. It's a good URL, right? Lawtomatic.com. Or Professor Baker can give you my information too.
Or I think with the Career Services Office, we'll try to put together some resources for people who are interested in a place to go so that we capture this information so that and we can see what we can do to leverage it and maybe get Professor Teninbaum back to do that training he promised for us. Right?
Glad to do it.
All right. Alright, we're supposed to press off.
Mike. Yeah. How are you, man?
Good seeing you.
How are things?
Pretty good. Yeah.
I can't see from here.